Today, we're diving into one of the most exciting and, one of the most controversial ideas in economics right now, universal basic income.
So, let's just start with a simple question. Really think about it. What if you got a paycheck every single month, no matter what, just for being you?
That's the core of a pretty radical idea called universal basic income. And we're not talking about another tax credit or a small government program here. This is a whole different way of thinking about things.
The promise behind it is, well, it's huge. We're talking about a potential end to poverty, a boost to public health, and maybe, just maybe, a safety net for a future where robots and AI are doing more and more of our jobs.
But that's the big question, isn't it? Is this a genuine workable solution to some of our biggest problems, or is it just a fantasy that sounds good on paper but would never work in reality? Let's dig into the evidence.
So, before we go any further, we need to get really clear on what we mean when we say UBI. The details here matter a lot.
For something to be a true universal basic income, it has to meet 4 criteria. It's got to be universal, meaning everyone gets it. It's unconditional, so you don't have to work or look for work. It's periodic, like a monthly paycheck, and it has to be sufficient, enough to actually live on.
Now, this is a really important distinction you have to know. You'll hear the term guaranteed income, or GI, thrown around a lot. The key difference is that GI is targeted. It only goes to certain people, usually those with low incomes. A true UBI, on the other hand, is universal. Everybody gets it. That's a huge difference.
So why all the buzz? Well, proponents see it as a silver bullet for a lot of problems. It could be that cushion we need against automation, a direct line to ending poverty, and even a way to improve our health by lowering the constant stress of financial insecurity. Some even frame it as a kind of dividend that we're all owed as citizens.
Okay, that all sounds great in theory, but what actually happens when you try it out in the real world? Lucky for us, there have been some really fascinating experiments.
When you look at the results, you see some really interesting things. In Finland, for example, giving unemployed people a basic income didn't really change whether they got a job, but it made them a lot happier. In Stockton, California, it actually helped people get full-time work. And way back in the Mincome experiment in Canada, there was only a small drop in work hours, and that was mostly from new mothers and students.
And here's one of the most powerful findings, something we see over and over. Look at the Stockton experiment. The people who got the money showed a significant drop in anxiety and depression. It turns out a little financial stability can have a huge impact on your mental health.
So this brings us to the biggest myth about UBI, the idea that if you give people free money, they'll all just quit their jobs and get lazy. The evidence actually points in the exact opposite direction. It seems this financial floor gives people the security to say no to a bad job and find a better one.
Okay, so the small-scale tests look promising. But now we have to face the giant trillion-dollar elephant in the room. Could we actually afford to do this for a whole country? This one quote just perfectly sums up the problem. You see, a UBI payment big enough to actually make a difference would cost an unbelievable amount of money. But a UBI that's cheap enough for us to afford, well, it wouldn't be big enough to do much good.
A lot of people say, oh, just cut other welfare programs to pay for it. It sounds simple, but the math just doesn't work. Not even close. If you cut nearly every major welfare program, you could only pay for a UBI that's still way, way below the poverty line.
All right then, what if we just borrow the money? Well, this is where the numbers start to look genuinely scary. Economic models predict that funding a UBI with debt would actually shrink the entire economy by almost 10% in a decade. That's not good.
And that's not even the worst of it. At the same time, the national debt would explode, rocketing up by over 80%. You just can't do that. It's a recipe for economic disaster. The conclusion is pretty clear. Funding a UBI with debt is a non-starter.
So, if we can't cut other programs and we can't just borrow the money, is the whole idea just dead in the water? Well, not necessarily, but it means we have to think about raising money in a completely different way.
Economists who think this could work point to a few main ideas. Things like a value-added tax, which most other countries already have, or carbon dividends, where you tax pollution and give the money back to the people. And then there's a land value tax.
Now, this land value tax idea is really clever because it does 2 jobs at once. First, it raises the money needed to fund the UBI. But second, it stops landlords from just jacking up the rent and swallowing all the extra cash that people are getting. It's a pretty elegant solution to a big potential problem. So, let's put this all together. We have this incredible promise, some really positive real-world evidence, and this absolutely massive funding challenge. It seems like there isn't just one UBI, there are two.
And this is what it boils down to. There's a path to failure, where we try to pay for it with debt or by destroying the existing safety net. That leads to economic disaster. But there's also a path to success, funded by smart, modern taxes on things like consumption, carbon, or land, which could work without wrecking the economy.
So the big takeaway here is that UBI itself isn't automatically a good or a bad idea. It's not that simple. Whether it succeeds or fails comes down to one thing: how it's designed, and most importantly, how we choose to pay for it.
And that leaves us with the real question. It's not an economic question anymore. The data suggests it could work. The real question is political. Are we, as a society, actually willing to make the kind of deep, fundamental changes needed to make this radical idea a reality?